I think relational care offers responses to the personal, the professional and the political. How we respond to providing care at a professional level, how we respond to giving it and receiving it at a personal level, and how that cannot fail to affect the political, the policy of how it is offered and funded. But most of my work is really about practical impact and examples. Because when I did my first piece of research, which was commissioned some years ago, what most struck me was things can be different. Not just things can be different, but things are different in certain places, in certain practices. And if they can be different and better in some places, with some practices, why can't they be different and better in many more places? Simple as that, really. Simple and difficult. So back in 2018, I co-authored a book called Developing a Model of Relational Care with James Woodward. And it was based on a substantial report which was commissioned by the Abbeyfield Society, a large charitable group of care homes that many of you will be familiar with. They commissioned me to look at well-being in their homes, right across the board, and also at spiritual life in particular. And to do that, they enabled me to undertake a whole series, actually nearly 100 in-depth interviews and home visits. Now, for those of you who are aware of the research methodology, you'll realise that 100 in-depth interviews is an awful lot. And during the course of that, I visited about 40 different homes right across the UK. It was commissioned research, and the report that came out of it initially was confidential to Abbeyfield. But being a very involved charity, they agreed to my using quite a lot of that material in a published book. And what I found was that there was considerable interest in this fresh look at the care of older people. There was a demand, not only in the sector but more widely, to know more about how the models of good practice that I found in Abbeyfield could actually work in other community and residential settings, what resources they needed to get up and running, and what the real benefits could be of investing in them. So I was really following through on what Marion said in the sense of how could new research, new learning, change actual practices on the ground? Well, because there was some interest in this, I decided to continue on to writing the second book, which we've already heard about this morning. Really working off my own bat, to be honest. I wasn't particularly commissioned by anyone. I just thought this was a useful thing to do. And that took me on to doing another 50 in-depth interviews, and also visiting a lot more care providers, more groups of care homes, but also community services and people who are being looked after in their own homes. I've aimed very much to give primacy to the voices of older people, care staff, managers and relatives. So most of what I talk about actually draws directly on those voices and uses them with enormous amounts of quotes to really give resonance to all the findings. But it doesn't just draw on those, it also draws on evaluation reports and other material that has been very generously shared with me. And building on those earlier observations, coming to some conclusions about what we mean by relational care. Now, we've been using that term a lot already today, but I think it's worth just unpacking again what I mean by it. And what I mean by it isn't necessarily exactly what everyone else means by it, because like many of these terminologies, They're actually rather more variable than you would think, and they don't appear in dictionaries with one definite definition. But by using this term, I mean that the formation of close, long-term bonds and relationships in a care setting can give a great sense of support and security to the entire community. And most importantly, the two-way relationships, based on mutual rather than unidirectional caregiving, are vital to well-being. And this is what the book is all about. Firstly, how society is moving from the organisational-centred care of the past through a revision into person-centred care and on to the revolution of relationship-centred care. Secondly, how this transformational change can be nurtured, and again Marion referred right towards the end of her presentation about transformation. Good care is transformational, so change that produces better care is also transformational. But how can it be nurtured in practical, realistic ways to provide better environments for mind, body and spirit? And thirdly, I want to look at the societal change that's required to support more enlightened care arrangements. So the implications of these observations are profound, because once older people are seen in the context of relationships rather than as needy recipients, the whole idea of ageism gets challenged. Older people can become more valued and respected, and then are enabled to contribute to their communities. One of the saddest things that seniors often say is that they feel little sense of self-worth. And this is undoubtedly, as I said earlier today, being exacerbated by all the conditions surrounding COVID-19 that have entrenched particular notions about older people. Similarly, in the setting of relational care, those who are in the role of carers also become more visible, recognised for their contribution, and can no longer, or at any rate should no longer, be dismissed as unskilled or seen as commodities to be moved around. Equally, there are implications for society and for providers. We need to take a transformative approach to the norms of caregiving. When we view ideas that are currently accepted as representing good practice through the lens of relational care, they undergo a paradigm shift. So let's have a look at the key components of the paradigm that get shifted. Firstly, the notion of independence must be re-examined. Independence is supposed to be a blessing, and certainly giving choice and respecting individuality is an essential part of good care delivery. While there must be freedom to express and be oneself, independence isn't quite that, and it can easily become just another word for loneliness. At its worst, it drives the practice of encouraging an older person to linger on in a house no longer suited to their needs, becoming increasingly too frail to deal with the move, relying on brief care sessions. Different types of community-based provision can delay and alleviate the dangers of transition, as we're going to hear from Charlotte Curran tomorrow. This is also true of domiciliary care based on relational principles. But in the end, the time may well come for many of us when those alone are not enough. We have to readdress what care homes provide and mean. So human beings are defined by interdependence, not independence. Gradually, the capability to do everything for oneself fades, and then we have to redefine accepted wisdom and offer the freedom to be rather than to do. I remember one of my mentors years ago saying, "Are we human beings or human doings?" Well, of course, we're beings. We can just be sometimes. People must know they're valued for who they are and enabled to contribute in ways that are still possible for them. So today and tomorrow in this event offers time to share practice and ideas, and I know that everybody is going to offer examples from their experience because you've already started doing it, which is wonderful. Not only about what works, but what doesn't as well. So the shift from independence to interdependence is vital. Secondly, in this paradigm shift, we need to unpack the concept of security. There's a tendency to equate security with safety, but the models of good practice I've visited suggest that this is not helpful. Older people do rate security very highly as being essential to their lives, and it's vital to the formation of relationships. But by security, what people often mean when they talk about it as something desirable isn't just being in a place where they have the assurance of help at hand and protection from intruders. They also talk about the feeling of knowing others, being known and accepted for themselves, being held in a net of love similar to that provided by a good family. Security is about being secure in who you are and who is with you and how that supports you. Safety is a different thing. An overemphasis on safety can prevent, ironically, the type of security that we all need from developing, because it overly limits the opportunities for contribution and self-articulation. I know some of you who've heard me speak before have heard this story before, but I'm going to tell it again because I quite like it. And this is a story that was told to me by a manager in one of the care homes I visited. One of the ladies living there wanted to clean the dining room floor after meals. She wanted to, nobody was going to make her do it. And she picked up a brush and she started brushing the floor. And a quite young member of staff rushed forward and took it off her and said, no, dear, you mustn't do that. And the manager took her aside, the member of staff, afterwards and said, why did you stop her doing that? The young lady said, well, health and safety, she can't be doing things like that. She's here to be looked after. To which the manager replied, my dear young lady, that woman was brushing floors before you were a twinkle in your father's eye. Just let her do it. And this is the thing. If people want to do something, if they can do it, let them do it. If they can't, then think how that can be facilitated. Yes, there may be some risk, but who amongst us lives without any risk, any sort of life worth living?
Amen.
So, I mentioned family as a model of life conducive to happiness. This is a contested idea, I think, because all of us might have a wry little smile about families sometimes. We know they can be dysfunctional. For some people, they can just be downright destructive. But so many people I interviewed referred to family as a touchstone that I think we ought to accept it can be and should be good family life, a benchmark for creating environments that favour relationships. And I'm going to return shortly to what that might mean. But here's just a few quotes from people I talked to about the importance of family. One said, this is someone living in a residential care home, it's our family, and everyone is affected by what happens here. Another said, when we sit down together for meals, we're like a family again. And a member of staff said to me, we are a family. We fall out and we make up again. So part of the paradigm shift is about restoring autonomy. Not the same as independence, autonomy. That is, having agency, having control over what you do and over choice. One of the interesting examples comes from applying Montessori principles, which are about empowering everyone to contribute to their community. A lot of you will have come across the Montessori model as applied to education, especially education of young children. But what it is all about really is giving people a feeling that they control the environment in which they live. You can apply these principles to care of older people, and it's being done in quite a few care home groups where it's a pioneering practice. What it often means in practice is making quite small changes to the environment, such as signage, encouraging people to do things for themselves, to get themselves a drink, to take up a piece of knitting and carry on with it. Not forcing them, just giving them that opportunity. The big investment for introducing Montessori principles into any form of care is about training. The people I spoke to had invested an awful lot in retraining staff, building in more time for interaction so that older people can be encouraged to improve their autonomy. Often these may be people who are living with dementia, but not necessarily. So the changes are directed towards re-enabling the brain such that older people can restart doing simple tasks by improving their motor skills, which are rooted in unconscious memory. There are 2 care home groups I visited which have been pioneering the practice, Milford and Hallmark, and their evaluation of impact suggests the investment yields a measurable return in terms of contentment and engagement. And of course those things have a knock-on effect on actual cash expenditure. But it's worth thinking about these things because they're fresh ways of looking at old problems. Another thing that some people find very uncomfortable, surprisingly uncomfortable, and this includes, I'm afraid, the Care Quality Commission, though they may have changed their minds. I think they are sort of softening up on this one. But another aspect is being unafraid to use the word love. Love is a word that was used a lot when I talked to people who were contented with their situation in care, whether that was residential or community-based, whether they were older people or carers. Love can mean many things, perhaps too many, but in the end, it is what most people seek, and the feeling that validates and supports our individual humanity. And here, again, are just a few quotes from people I spoke to who wanted to use this word and did. First of all, a regional manager of a group of care homes. Can we say love and hug people? Well, we do it in most of our care homes. Think about the effect of COVID on that. A member of care staff. It's a loved place and I love working here. A manager of a large group of care homes. You can't buy happiness and love. There's no price on it. And yet, there is a price to an extent. There's the price of change. There's the price of investment in new ways of looking at things. But it's not a price in terms of just money. Thirdly, in the list of matters that need reassessing, and just briefly for now, acknowledging the importance of relational care has profound implications for policy and funding because it has a direct impact on provision and what can be achieved by making changes. Implementing worthwhile changes does cost money, but not necessarily a great deal. Some changes save so much down the line because they preserve mental and physical health and improve staff retention, that they actually more than pay for themselves. Other changes do have to be funded without a complete return on investment financially, but of course the return on investment in other ways may be profound. So, as I've already said this morning, we're going to be looking further tomorrow at policy and at considering new ways of making provision that's fairer and more consistent. So, turning now to what relational care means in everyday practice, and that's really what I've been writing about. What are the enabling conditions? Well, they include not only creating opportunities for as much autonomy as possible, as we've just heard, but also the right physical environment for relationships to flourish. There's so much to this. Again, it's not something I can possibly cover in a talk this afternoon, but we can discuss it, I hope, when we are talking further together. But I just want to allude briefly to some physical issues in the environment that really matter. So in this respect, having meal times together is invaluable for friendship, stimulation, and discreet monitoring of well-being. Now, I know there are many residential homes that have abandoned the idea of shared meals. They feel it's too institutional, that people want more choice, that they don't necessarily want to be pulled out of their rooms into shared meals. I really contest that. I'm not saying every meal should be rigorously organised and shared, but once a day, to bring people together as a family has so many benefits. And it doesn't take away choice, because there can be choice over what you eat, there can be choice about where you sit. Of course, if people feel particularly unwell or just disinclined one day, they should certainly not be dragged off to a dining room. But providing those shared meals means that most people actually do look forward to them. It gives them structure to the day, which is often lacking, I'm afraid. It gives good nutrition, and it's essential that meals should be really delicious. Sounds obvious, but not always taken to heart. Hot meals, delicious meals, meals that people look forward to, meals that stimulate conversation, meals where carers can just keep a little eye open. Is somebody not enjoying themselves and their food? Is somebody looking worried? Is there tension that needs addressing? We might have a discussion about this one later, because I know some of you won't agree with me on it. But my belief is, above all, if we're talking about residential care, we're talking about a home, family home, not about a hotel. Cleanliness is very important, of course it is. Nobody should want to live in a dirty, smelly place. Of course you don't. Cleanliness has many, many functions, amongst which is a matter of respect to the people who live there. But decor should be homely and relaxed with familiar items around. If you think about it, you can go off on holiday to the most beautiful 5-star hotel if you're terribly lucky, and think, oh, I could live like this. But you couldn't live like that. You're glad to get home, you're glad to see a bit of a mess, you're glad to be able to drop your book down and leave it where you put it. If you like animals, you're only too glad to have one run up to you and say hello when you get back. It almost makes it all worthwhile. People living in residential accommodation don't have somewhere else to go. That is their family home. It's not a hotel. And this really affects emotional and spiritual well-being. So I'm going to continue on this theme of physical environment, because I don't think it's one that's going to be spoken about particularly tomorrow when we look at innovation, although there is an element of it. And many of you here will, I think, relate to what I'm saying. Not least, I'm looking at Alex now, because he's involved in actual physical design of buildings and will know what I mean by this. But when I was working with Abbeyfield, we drew up a list of must-haves and should-haves for residential homes. And these appear in the book as 10 top points, and I give examples of reality where each of these has been achieved somewhere and where it is. So if you're interested and ask those places nicely, they'd probably let you look at them. So I was going to mention a few as examples. For instance, it's very important in residential care to have 2 communal rooms, one without a television, so that there can be conversation, and chairs arranged for conversation, easy access to making drinks and snacks for oneself, garden rooms, people love garden rooms, and summer houses, somewhere that you can go, make yourself a coffee, sit and do what you want, other people will drop by, you can have a chat. You've got to feel that this is a place that belongs to you. And the same with community facilities, such as day centres. It has to belong to the people who are there. It's not just being provided for them, it belongs to them. Views of familiar countryside is really important because it helps knit people back into their community. I found small care homes in Scotland for some reason were particularly brilliant on this. I don't know how they managed it, but small ones with views of the countryside where people actually used to work on the land and still feel connected into the farms that they knew. And views from windows where people can be seen, not just trees, people, say parks, playgrounds, streets are excellent. These all seem perhaps rather mundane, rather fiddly, and you might wonder why I'm referring to them in a talk about the book and the whole concept of relational care. But I'm doing that because I think it needs to be rooted in reality. It's so easy to come up with lots of good ideas, but what I really want to do is give examples of how it can be achieved. It's not just, a hope. It's happening around the country, these good things that we can learn from. So they may seem small or trivial, but taken together, they underpin a different way of looking at the whole picture of care provision and older lives. So we need to think in different ways. We need to think about families, not just bricks and mortar. We need to think about interdependence, not just independence. About self-worth and security, rather than protecting older people at all costs. About laughing together as well as listening. You wouldn't believe how many people I spoke to who said, we sit down and have a good laugh. We don't just listen to each other being depressed, although we might do that. We actually have a joke. And I remember talking to one lady who was living with quite advanced dementia, and she said something like, I love being here, we have a good laugh. My job is to pull other people's legs. If I don't have that, I haven't got a job. We need to think about a future that includes purpose and a past that holds meaning. And that means not just always dwelling on reminiscence, although that is a very important part of life for older people. We do need to think back and to feel rooted in our past. But simply thinking about the past, although there was no future whatsoever, is not right, because even a short future can include purpose and meaning and friendship. We need to think about mutual affection and a loving environment. Not just about respect, as important as it is, but about acceptance of each other as human beings. Knowledge of each other. And that's a two-way thing. It's not just about carers knowing who the older people are. It's about older people knowing who their carers are. And that's important for carers as well. There are so many innovations that can transform the lives of older people, carers and community. The results of isolating older people from mainstream society, even when it occurs as a result of good intentions, not only deprives them of self-worth with severe impacts on physical and mental health, but it also deprives younger generations of all the benefits of elder experience and wisdom. And tomorrow, I'm so pleased that Stephen Burke, who is with us now, is going to, who is a founder of United for All Ages and is now working with the Hallmark Care Homes Foundation. He'll tell you much more about that, I'm sure. He's going to explain how this need not happen, this generational split, and how apparent generational divides can be addressed. I think I'm right in saying that, am I, Stephen? Good. I'm not giving you an impossible task, I know that. And there are recent innovations in the growing area of age technology that support mutual understanding by creating time and interaction. Or conversely, they can attempt to replace human interaction with sterile artifacts, a warning to us all. So that's a bit of a gallop through what I believe relational care is. It's not a term that I invented, but it's a term that I have really been working to develop and to bring into the mainstream so that we can think about it at all points in planning all types of care provision and developing policy on it.